Kevan Lannister stood in the flickering torchlight of the Red Keep's lower passageway, reflecting on how differently events might have transpired had Tywin Lannister still lived. He could almost see his brother's tall form cutting through these corridors with unyielding purpose, golden hair gone mostly silver, eyes hard with the weight of the entire realm on his shoulders. Tywin had been Kevan's North Star, the man whose competence and authority he had never questioned. But Tywin was gone, cut down on the privy by his own son, Tyrion, as Cersei had so brazenly announced. And in the vacuum left behind, the realm lay teetering on the brink of chaos. Kevan had never held the ambition to seize control. He had always served. He served Tywin, served the family, served the house. But in these perilous days, with King's Landing rife with rumor and the Lannister name on the verge of ruin, he found himself at a crossroads he could never have anticipated. He began to move, pacing carefully in the darkness, passing the rough-hewn stone walls that smelled faintly of damp and old secrets. The cloying odor reminded him of how deep the tunnels ran beneath the Red Keep, of all the things that thrived in the darkness. He couldn't help but think that, in a sense, everything that had festered Cersei's hidden relationship with Jaime, the long-kept secret of her children's parentage, was about to come crawling out into the open. For too long, Kevan had held his tongue. He had believed that it was best to protect the family's name at all costs, to keep the rumor of incest as rumor, not fact. After all, Tywin had once told him that illusions were sometimes necessary for the survival of great houses. But Tywin was gone, and illusions no longer sufficed. Kevan paused at a corner, listening to the scurrying of rats. He felt a twinge of disgust as he realized these shadows in the Red Keep were not so different from the shadows lurking in the corners of House Lannister's reputation. There was a time when the name Lannister commanded automatic respect, a time when their gold gave them power, and Tywin's ruthless brilliance gave them fearsome authority. But now, Cersei's recklessness eroded that fear and replaced it with mockery and whispers. She spent her days seething with paranoia, lashing out at perceived enemies, ignoring the wisdom of experienced counselors. She had placed sycophants on the small council, men with little skill aside from flattering her and feeding her vanity. She schemed incessantly against the Tyrells, set the faith militant loose in the city, and tightened her grip on poor Tommen's mind. Kevan could see that her desperate attempts to hold power were undermining the very foundations of the crown. Clutching his cloak tighter, Kevan made his way back up from the underpassages. He stepped carefully on the worn steps that led him out of the gloom and into a small courtyard behind a lesser-known side door of Maegor's Holdfast. A crisp breeze brushed past him, carrying the distant sounds of men training in the yard. He could hear the clang of steel and the harsh shouts of drills from the Red Keep guard. The sky above was bruised with the last trace of sunlight, the final moments of dusk before the city was plunged into night. He had an appointment, one that might define the rest of his life. If he failed, Kevan knew all too well what fate awaited him. The Black Cells, if he was lucky. More likely, Cersei would find some more creative form of vengeance, especially if she discovered that her uncle was the one exposing the secret that would inevitably destroy her reign. He stepped through a narrow door, dismissing the few guards with a curt nod. The interior corridor was torchlit, the flames dancing off rich tapestries of old Targaryen kings conquering the Seven Kingdoms. Kevan hardly spared the images a glance. His thoughts were consumed by the coded note he had received the night before, a note that bore no signature but came with the Tyrell sigil hidden in an elaborate cipher. It was Lady Olenna's doing, he had no doubt. She was the only Tyrell cunning enough to orchestrate a cryptic meeting with no risk to herself. The Queen of Thorns obviously suspected something about Cersei that Kevan also knew. The truth behind the paternity of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. And if Lady Olenna Tyrell did not have the full picture, she had enough to cause a storm that would tear Cersei from the throne. Kevan knew that the time to act was now, or else he would be dragged into the disgrace that was coming anyway. He reached a private chamber far from the eyes and ears of the usual court watchers. Opening the door, he found himself face to face with Mace Tyrell, standing stiffly in his ill-fitting doublet, Lady Olenna seated to the side with a look of haughty impatience, and Ser Loras leaning against a window, arms folded across his chest. Kevan observed them in a moment's silence. Mace nodded as though everything was perfectly normal, while Lady Olenna tapped her cane on the floor, her bright eyes fixed on Kevan with sharp intelligence. Loras seemed torn between casual insolence and an undercurrent of tension. Kevan bowed politely, closing the door behind him. He started to speak but halted as Olenna waved a hand. Yes, yes, spare us the pleasantries, she said. You know why we're here, Lord Kevan. Kevan straightened. Indeed, my lady, but I'll state it plainly. The Lannister name is in jeopardy, and the entire realm may fall into open rebellion if something isn't done about. He hesitated, measuring his words carefully. The current occupant of the Regency. Mace puffed out his chest. Cersei's made quite a mess of things. The Faith militant are running amok, and the king is too young, too easily swayed by his mother. Lady Olenna snorted softly. Oh, don't sugarcoat it, Mace. The boy is sweet but dim-witted enough to be led by the ear, and Cersei sees to it that every whisper he hears is hers alone. So many incompetent decisions in such a short period. It's a gift, truly. Kevan felt the pang of guilt and frustration. Tommen is a kind boy, but yes, he's under her control. However, what I have is bigger than just her bungled regency. It's the truth we've all heard rumored, that Jaime fathered Cersei's children. Tywin denied it. I denied it. But the evidence is there, and now I have proof. The torchlight flickered, and Loras stirred from his place by the window. He exchanged glances with his grandmother. Proof that, if presented properly, could shake the realm, Loras said, his voice tight. Kevan nodded, remembering how he had come into possession of that final piece of evidence. A letter in Jaime's own hand, from years ago, which referenced our children with heartbreaking simplicity. It had been locked away in Tywin's personal chest, ironically saved from destruction by the same thoroughness that had once made Tywin Lannister so formidable. Kevan had found it after his brother's death, sealed with Jaime's personal sigil, reeking of old confessions and secrets. He had wrestled with whether to burn it or keep it. In the end, his sense of duty had won out. Perhaps it was the ghost of Tywin's voice urging him to handle it as a last resort. Once this is revealed, it will confirm that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen have no claim to the throne, Kevan said quietly. This will destroy Cersei. It will also mean that Tommen's claim is invalid. It puts House Baratheon, if any remain, and Targaryen pretenders or perhaps even Stannis in a stronger position. Even Renly, had he lived. He paused, letting the ramifications weigh on the 3 Tyrells in the room. There is no undoing this once it's done. We must be absolutely certain we can guide the realm through the chaos. Lady Olenna's eyes narrowed. Chaos indeed. If Tommen is found illegitimate, that means there is no lawful occupant on the Iron Throne. The lords of the realm will rally around their own ambitions. The Tyrells have joined with the Lannisters by marriage, but this union was on the premise that Joffrey, then Tommen, was a Baratheon. If that's undone, Margaery's marriage is worthless, and we Tyrells will look like fools, or worse, conspirators. Kevan offered a small, sad smile. We're all conspirators in this. We merely conspired differently. Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. But where does that leave my daughter? Olenna tapped her cane again. She either remains queen, though to an illegitimate boy it may mean nothing, or we sever ties and declare the marriage null and void, which would cause an uproar. Don't be a ninny, Mace. Think this through. She turned back to Kevan. The question is, what do you propose as a solution? We reveal the incest to the realm and say, what exactly? Who rules? You? One of your nephews? The Tyrells don't want to lose their place. Kevan inhaled, bracing himself. I propose removing Cersei quietly before the news is made official. If we move quickly and secure Tommen, if we can keep him from Cersei's influence, there might be a way to handle the aftermath. The realm needs stability. Perhaps the best course is to place a regent or a council to rule while we sort out the matter of Tommen's legitimacy with the High Septon. Lady Olenna gave a mirthless chuckle. And the High Septon you're referring to is the same man Cersei allowed to become the new High Sparrow, the one who's locked up Loras and Margaery on charges of perjury and boogery? My dear, that man's devotion to the faith is absolute, but his zeal is also dangerous. He won't be easily swayed. Kevan's mouth tightened. We can't proceed without some involvement from the faith. If the realm sees that the High Septon is investigating this matter, it may at least lend credibility to the claim that Tommen is illegitimate. Without that, it appears only as a scheme. But if he's determined to be a product of incest, the line of succession passes elsewhere. Many would call for the restoration of House Targaryen, or perhaps they would rally around Stannis if he still lives. Mace shrugged. He was defeated at the Blackwater and fled to the north, last we heard. He's rumored to be fighting the Boltons or the Wildlings, depending on which story you believe. In any case, can he still press a claim effectively? Olenna's eyes glittered. He has the better bloodline argument if Robert's rebellion is still considered lawful. He's Robert's elder brother. Even so, he's not exactly beloved by the realm. Kevan nodded, feeling the weight of the land's precarious future. That's why we must proceed carefully. We're not toppling Cersei only to watch all of Westeros burn. We have to find a way to keep peace. How do you propose to overthrow your niece? Loras asked. There was a tension in his voice, a flicker of caution. He had been imprisoned by the faith militant and freed only with difficulty, or so Kevan had heard. He likely had no love for the new regime. Kevan exhaled slowly. Her personal guard is small. The gold cloaks will follow the hand of the king or the master of coin if they see that the rest of the small council supports a change. The problem is that so many positions are empty or held by her creatures. But if we can get enough houses behind us, Tyrell, Redwyne, Tarly, maybe even the Martells if they can set aside their quarrel with the Lannisters, then we have a chance to force her to step down without a bloodbath. Once we secure her in custody, the High Sparrow can be invited to examine the allegations, and the evidence can be laid out. Lady Olenna's brow arched. And if Cersei resists, or if she tries to burn King's Landing to the ground in her madness? Kevan didn't reply at once, thinking of the mad King Aerys and the caches of wildfire that had once been hidden beneath the city. He had no proof that Cersei might go that far, but he felt a tremor of unease. Cersei's mind was more unstable by the day. We do it swiftly and keep her away from any authority she might wield. It will require the help of the Kingsguard, who are not entirely in her thrall, though that's another complication, given Jaime's membership. At the name of Jaime, a pall fell over the room. Kevan allowed a moment of silence before continuing. Jaime is still Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and though he is my nephew, I don't know what side he'll choose. His sense of honor might force him to defend Tommen no matter what. On the other hand, if he sees the realm at stake, perhaps he'll yield. I can't predict his actions. Lady Olenna let out a biting laugh. A Kingslayer with an oath to guard his son as king. The realm is full of ironies. Well, do what you must, Lord Kevan. The Tyrells will back you as long as you can promise us that Margaery will be safe from these spurious charges and that our investment in this realm isn't squandered. If we're to remain in alliance, House Lannister must come to terms with House Tyrell's interests. Can you assure me of that? Kevan straightened, meeting her gaze. I can. The Tyrells have the capital's food supply, and your forces are formidable. Together, we can ensure a smooth transition. And if all goes well, Margaery may remain queen, if that is what the realm needs. Loras frowned. But if Tommen's declared a bastard, Kevan nodded. Yes, if he's declared a bastard, then the marriage may be declared void. But perhaps there are ways to handle that so Margaery's position is still strong. Maybe she remains as the king's. Call it a consort who had no knowledge of the deception. We will find a way to maintain her honor, especially if it can be shown that Cersei tricked everyone. Lady Olenna's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You're a cautious man, Kevan. I respect that. But understand, if Cersei tries to drag Margaery down with her, I will personally see her head on a spike. This has gone on long enough. Kevan nodded. Agreed. This matter has to end before the entire realm collapses. One final thing, my lady, he said, looking at Olenna with a grave expression. If we reveal this, it may lead to open conflict with Jaime. Are you prepared for that? She waved a dismissive hand. Jaime Lannister is formidable, yes, but he's only one man, and from the rumors of his time at Riverrun and in the Riverlands, it seems his fighting hand is not what it used to be. If he attempts to thwart us, we will have no choice but to respond in kind. I care little for the illusions of knighthood now. Kevan gazed at each Tyrell in turn, seeing the resolve and the wariness in their faces. This was it, the conspiratorial moment that would define the future of House Lannister and House Tyrell. With a final nod, he stepped out into the corridor, heart pounding with both dread and a curious sense of relief. At least now there was a plan. He would expose the incest, oust Cersei, and try to salvage what remained of their house's honor, if such a thing was even possible. Later that night, Kevan sat alone in his chambers, the single candle on his table flickering in the darkness. Before him lay Jaime's letter, the final nail in Cersei's coffin. He smoothed the parchment with a trembling hand, reading the words that still shocked him, despite having seen them so many times. There was no date on the letter, no direct mention of the children's names, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Our children," Jaime had written, "my golden boys and girl, the only bright spots in this vile nest of vipers. I do my duty to them gladly, though it means wearing this white cloak." He had addressed it to Cersei, referencing her as my love, my twin, my life. Kevan could scarcely imagine the anguish that had led Jaime to write such a thing in the first place, or the arrogance to set it down in writing. But write it he did, and keep it Tywin did, as though the old lion wanted a final failsafe to control them both. Tywin would never have allowed the secret to come out while he lived. But with him gone, that letter was the one piece of unassailable evidence that would prove the rumors true. Kevan's mind replayed the conversation with Olenna. No matter how carefully they planned this coup, blood would be spilled. King's Landing was never a place where power changed hands peacefully, especially when so many different factions hovered, waiting for their chance to strike. And there was the matter of the Iron Throne itself. Once Tommen was exposed as illegitimate, would that not plunge the realm into another war for succession? Kevan knew that if it came to that, the Lannister name might be tarnished beyond redemption. But if he did nothing, if he let Cersei's madness and paranoia run unchecked, it would be even worse. The city would tear itself apart under her rule. Perhaps she would provoke the Tyrells or the Faith or even the Martells into open rebellion. Too many eggshells had been cracked already. The time for half measures was over. He set the letter aside and reached for a quill. He would need the signatures of powerful lords to back a formal petition to the king, insisting that the Queen Mother step down pending an inquiry. It was a legalistic approach. Kevan wasn't naive enough to think Cersei would go quietly, but if he could at least cloak the coup in legitimacy, the Gold Cloaks might hesitate to defend her. He wanted to avoid butchery in the Red Keep if he could. He wrote through the night, composing letters to Lords Tarly, Redwine, and even a carefully worded missive to Prince Doran Martell. None of them needed every detail, just the hint that the Queen Mother had gravely overstepped and that proof existed of a scandal that would rock the Iron Throne. He needed them to be prepared to stand behind the new regency or an alternative that would keep the realm from collapsing. He kept a close eye on the time, aware that dawn would soon break over the city. In the morning, Kevan arranged for the letters to be sent out by discreet messengers, men whose loyalty and competence he trusted. He gave them instructions to avoid the main roads and any watchers who might be lingering outside the Red Keep. Cersei had her own network of spies, and if any of them caught wind of Kevan's communications, the game would be up before it began. Days passed in anxious preparation. Kevan continued to serve on the small council, giving Cersei little reason to suspect him. He played the dutiful uncle, occasionally offering tempered advice or mild corrections. She looked at him with something akin to disdain, though she hid it behind a faint veneer of courtesy. Their conversations were tense, overshadowed by the knowledge that each was measuring the other's loyalty. Cersei was too paranoid not to sense that Kevan's patience with her was wearing thin, but she likely attributed any potential betrayal to the Tyrells rather than Kevan himself. Jaime returned from the Riverlands during this time, having resolved the siege at Riverrun. Kevan watched him approach the throne one evening, golden hand glinting in the torchlight, the other hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Jaime's face was unreadable, hardened from years of warfare and regrets. Once, Kevan had found a certain warmth in Jaime, a sense that behind the bravado was a genuine soul. But after the fiasco at the September of Baelor, after the monstrous reputation he had garnered by killing Aerys, Kevan wondered if Jaime's bitterness and cynicism had swallowed him entirely. "I hear you've been busy, Uncle," Jaime said, cornering Kevan in a lesser-used corridor after a council meeting. He spoke quietly, but there was an undercurrent of tension in his voice. Kevan forced a casual tone. "Busy, yes, as one must be when the realm is in peril." Jaime studied him, green eyes narrowing. "Cersei thinks you're plotting with the Tyrells. I told her you wouldn't do anything so rash without good reason. But she's convinced you've turned on her, that you resent her for how she's handled things." Kevan exhaled, feigning frustration. "I do resent many of her decisions, that's no secret. She's alienated the Tyrells, armed the Faith militant. These things have consequences. But I haven't actively plotted with anyone. Not in the sense she suspects." Jaime's gaze flicked to the floor. "She's been through much. The walk of atonement. The shame. She's lost so much already. Try to understand." Kevan inhaled slowly, remembering the humiliating spectacle of Cersei being marched naked through the streets. He had felt no glee in that. It was a cruelty that tarnished the entire city, though it was also an event that had further emboldened the faith. "I do not lack compassion for what she endured, but she was the architect of many of those circumstances. And now she's doubling down on her mistakes. Look around, Jaime. The city is restless. The faith militant do as they please, and the crown is in debt beyond measure. Cersei has no plan to stabilize the realm. She's too consumed with vengeance." Jaime's expression twisted in conflict. "If you come for her, you'll find me in your way." His tone was quiet but firm. Kevan studied him, feeling a surge of sorrow. "I would expect no less. A king's guard must protect the Queen Mother if the king commands it." Something flickered in Jaime's eyes, perhaps a recognition of the old, unspoken truth that all of this was built on lies. "Beware, Uncle," he said finally. "Do not push her too far." He turned and strode off, golden hand clattering softly against his sword belt. Kevan watched him go, a heaviness gathering in his chest. Jaime was the wild card. If Jaime chose bloodshed to protect Cersei, Kevan would be forced to fight his own nephew. The mere thought of it turned his stomach. But he couldn't allow that dread to paralyze him. He had come too far. The next day, Kevan received replies from several of his letters. Randyll Tarly sent a curt message, not pledging open support but hinting that if the Queen Mother were shown to be a traitor or a sinner in the eyes of the faith, Tarly's men would not defend her. Paxter Redwine was more eager to topple Cersei, provided the Tyrells would confirm the shipping routes and trade deals for the Arbor's wines. Doran Martell's response was subtle and cryptic, but it seemed he was willing to let King's Landing solve its own problems, offering no direct assistance but also not standing in the way. That, in itself, was something of a victory. Martell hatred for the Lannisters ran deep, yet if Doran was prepared to remain neutral, Kevan could proceed without fearing a Dornish assault from the south. And so the plan was set. At the next session of the small council, Kevan would press for a regency council to handle matters of governance while Cersei recovered from her ordeals. If she refused, he would demand an inquiry by the faith. That was the moment the Tyrell men in the city would assert that the Queen Mother be taken into custody for further questioning. Then Kevan would produce the letter, the evidence of incest, before the High Sparrow. In theory, the gold cloaks and the small number of Lannister guards left loyal to Kevan would be enough to secure Cersei. If it went smoothly, Jaime would be caught off guard. Kevan hoped that once it was done, Jaime might see reason rather than fight a hopeless battle. But plans rarely survived contact with reality. The morning of the council meeting dawned bright, the sun reflecting off the gilded towers of the Red Keep. Banners stirred in the gentle breeze coming off the Blackwater. Kevan dressed in his finest doublet, the crimson and gold of House Lannister, pinned with a small lion brooch that Tywin had once given him. He looked in the mirror, noticing how the silver in his hair had spread, how lines of worry etched his face. This was to be the crowning moment of his life. Either he would save the realm from Cersei's madness, or he would condemn them all to a civil war. His heart pounded, but he steadied himself. He was a Lannister. He would see this through with dignity. As he entered the council chamber, he noted who was present. Cersei herself, regal in a black gown embroidered with gold. Her posture was rigid, and a faint, humorless smile graced her lips. Grand Maester Pycelle was there, dozing slightly, but Kevan suspected the old man was more awake than he let on. Qyburn sat beside Cersei, eyes darting about with nervous energy. Mace Tyrell was in attendance, wearing his resplendent green and gold, forced into silent compliance for the moment. Ser Loras was absent, which was part of the arrangement. He would be rallying the Tyrell guards in discreet positions around the Red Keep, ready to move at Kevan's signal. Kevan bowed as custom demanded and took his seat. There was no hand of the king at the moment, since Cersei had effectively barred any appointment, preferring her own authority. That too would change. The chamber was heavy with tension as the meeting began. Cersei spoke first, her voice a measured calm that set Kevan's nerves on edge. "We have matters of trade from the Westerlands to discuss, Uncle," she said. "It seems the iron mines are not producing as much as we hoped." "Yes," Kevan replied. "I have some insights on that matter. But before we delve into trade, there is a more pressing concern regarding the governance of the realm. I believe it is time we formalize a regency council to assist the king, given his youth and the many challenges that have arisen." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "I see. And who, pray tell, do you propose to sit on this council?" Kevan let out a small breath. "Representatives from major houses with due respect to the faith, as well as some seasoned minds who can lend stability. Perhaps Lord Tarly, Lord Redwine, and Lord Tyrell in an official capacity." He glanced at Mace, who nodded uncertainly, and, of course, certain Crownlands lords as well. Cersei smirked. "And do I have no say in this, Uncle? I am the Queen Mother, after all." Kevan met her gaze squarely. "Your authority is recognized, but the city remembers that you were forced to atone by the High Sparrow, and many in the realm question your leadership after certain mistakes. It would be prudent to share the burden of rule, if only to quell unrest." Her lips twitched. "How noble of you. One might almost believe your concern is genuine, and not a transparent grab for power." Kevan straightened. "I care for the good of House Lannister, your grace, and for the realm. I propose we call upon the High Sparrow to give his blessing, so the people see unity between crown and faith." Cersei's face darkened. She knew she had a tenuous alliance with the faith militant, but she also knew how precarious it was. "You presume too much. The king will not stand for having his mother pushed aside, nor will I tolerate it." She stood suddenly, fists clenched. Mace Tyrell coughed into his hand, glancing nervously at Kevan. This was the moment of confrontation, a hair trigger away from chaos. Kevan inhaled, preparing to rise, to declare that an inquiry must be held, that Cersei must submit to the faith's questions, that the incest must come to light. But before he could speak, the door to the council chamber burst open. A gold-cloaked guard rushed in, wide-eyed, ignoring protocol. "My lords," he gasped, "the Red Keep is under siege. Men in black armor, armed to the teeth, have taken the courtyard. They wore black cloaks with golden lion sigils." Kevan's blood ran cold. Cersei's eyes lit up with savage triumph. "Ah," she said, voice trembling with delight. "That would be my brother's men, I expect. Jaime has been busy, Uncle." Kevan rose to his feet, heart pounding. "Your men? What is the meaning of this?" Cersei shrugged, eyes gleaming. "Did you think you could plan a coup without me hearing about it? Jaime had the sense to warn me. I learned of your little letters, your inquiries to the Tyrells. I may have some spies of my own, dear uncle. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe we'll let Jaime's loyal knights handle the traitors who have come to dethrone me. Don't worry. I'm sure the Tyrell men are being dealt with." Even as she spoke, an uproar of shouting and steel echoed through the corridors. Kevan's plan was unraveling. The Tyrells had men outside, but apparently Jaime had mustered a surprise force. Lannister men loyal to him personally, men who had served with him in the Riverlands. Kevan cursed himself for underestimating Jaime's ability to orchestrate such a counterstroke. The letter revealing the incest was still tucked away in Kevan's sleeve, but now, if he revealed it, it would look like a desperate lie in the face of defeat. He had to move quickly. Mace Tyrell stood, panic spreading across his features. "My guards are stationed near the gates," he stammered. "If these men in black armor are inside already..." Cersei advanced on Kevan. "Arrest him," she hissed to the gold cloaks in the room. Two guards, uncertain but loyal to the crown, stepped forward. Kevan's hand twitched toward the letter. He knew the moment he was seized, everything would be lost. But he also saw Qyburn edging closer, that unsettling glint in his eye. Kevan realized with a sinking dread that he might not even survive this day. Yet Kevan refused to yield. As the guard stepped in to take him, he shouted, "You're the traitor, Cersei. I have proof you bedded your brother, that your children are bastards born of incest." He yanked the letter from his sleeve and brandished it. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Even the gold cloaks froze at such an accusation. Cersei's eyes flared. "Lies," she spat. "That letter is a forgery. Seize him now." But Kevan kept speaking, voice booming with a resonance he didn't know he possessed. "Listen to me, men of the gold cloaks. I have a letter penned by Ser Jaime Lannister himself, speaking of our children. Hear me out before you obey this tyrant." He tried to break free from the guards, but they gripped his arms. The letter fluttered in his hand. Kevan saw Pycelle's jaw drop, and Mace Tyrell's eyes widen in utter shock. The entire chamber erupted in chaos. Grand Maester Pycelle hobbled forward, trying to reach the letter, while Qyburn lunged for Kevan with surprising agility. In the struggle, Kevan felt a blow to his side. He gasped, the world spinning, the letter slipping from his fingers. One of the gold cloaks kicked it across the floor toward Pycelle. Blood trickled down Kevan's side, and he realized that Qyburn's hidden blade had found its mark. The pain was sharp, but Kevan forced himself to stand tall, resisting the guards who held him. "You see?" he choked out. "She stabs me for speaking the truth." Cersei, face twisted with rage, advanced on Pycelle, who stooped to pick up the letter. "Don't you dare read that," she snarled. But Pycelle, his trembling hands uncharacteristically determined, was already scanning the words. His eyes grew wide as saucers, and he let out a breathless wheeze. "This, by the gods," Pycelle croaked. "It does appear to be Ser Jaime's hand." Cersei swung around, slapping the old man so hard he reeled backward. "Worthless fool," she shouted. But the damage was done. Mace Tyrell had seen enough. He shouted for the gold cloaks to stand down, while simultaneously calling out for his own men to storm the chamber. For a moment, no one knew who to obey. Then the door burst open again, and a group of Tyrell guards, armed with swords and halberds, rushed in, pushing aside the handful of black-armored Lannister knights who had accompanied Cersei. The clash of steel echoed in the corridor as Jaime's men battled Tyrell soldiers. Kevan felt the blood soaking his tunic. The guards holding him loosened their grip, unsure where their loyalties lay. Gathering what strength he had, Kevan pulled free and stumbled toward Mace Tyrell. "She's undone," he rasped. "We can still save the city. Seize her." Mace, galvanizing himself, nodded vigorously. "Arrest the Queen Mother," he shouted. A cluster of Tyrell guards and even a few uncertain gold cloaks advanced on Cersei. She backed away, her expression wild. "You fools," she hissed. "Do you think any of you will survive what comes next? My son is the king. We have the mountain. We have Jaime." Qyburn tried to intercept, but a Tyrell halberd slammed into him, sending him sprawling. The guards closed in on Cersei, while Grand Maester Pycelle, still clutching the incriminating letter, hovered near the corner of the room. Kevan dropped to a knee, breath ragged. As a red haze crept into his vision, he struggled to remain conscious. The wound in his side felt hot, and he could feel his strength ebbing. Suddenly, Jaime himself appeared at the chamber's threshold, sword in hand, golden cloak swirling around him. At his back were more men in black armor, and Kevan's heart sank. They must have gained entry through another route. Blood spattered Jaime's breastplate, and his expression was a mix of desperation and fury. He saw Cersei cornered by Tyrell guards, Pycelle brandishing the letter, and Kevan crouched near Mace Tyrell with a bleeding side. "Stop!" Jaime roared, voice echoing off the chamber walls. The fighting paused, men looking to one another in confusion. "You will not lay a hand on the Queen Mother." Mace Tyrell, emboldened by numbers, barked back. "She's under arrest for high treason and, gods forbid, incest. The realm will hear of this." Jaime's sword hovered. His gaze flickered to Kevan, and a swirl of conflicting emotions crossed his face. "Uncle, is this truly what you wanted? Our house undone before the entire realm?" Kevan, struggling for breath, managed to speak. "Better undone than rotted from within, Jaime," he said hoarsely. "Better the truth than a lie that dooms us all." Cersei, taking advantage of the pause, made a break for it, darting toward Jaime's side. The Tyrell guards moved to stop her, but Jaime threatened them with his blade. "Back!" he shouted, standing protectively in front of her. The moment quivered with the threat of renewed bloodshed. As Jaime's men and Tyrell men clashed swords once more, Kevan saw the glint of steel, heard the screams, and felt the swirl of motion around him. He tried to stand, but the pain drove him back to his knee. Pycelle's voice rose in the din. "The letter. We have proof." He waved the parchment in the air. "The Queen Mother's children are fathered by—" Jaime's eyes went wild. He lunged for the old man, but Mace Tyrell's men blocked him, forming a ring around Pycelle. In a flash of desperate cunning, Jaime pivoted and grabbed Cersei by the arm, pulling her toward a side door. She let out a half-scream, half-sob as they fled, Jaime bellowing for his men to follow. Half of them did, while the others found themselves locked in combat with Tyrell soldiers. Kevan saw crossbow bolts fly, and a black-armored knight fell with a grunt. The bolt lodged in his visor. "Murderers!" Mace Tyrell shouted, though it was unclear to whom. He turned to Kevan, face pale and sweaty, a flicker of concern crossing it. "My lord, you're hurt. We must get you to the maesters." "Pycelle, help him." Kevan nodded weakly, trying to press a hand to the wound in his side to slow the bleeding. Pycelle waddled over, still trembling but resolute in the face of the crisis. "Yes, yes," he muttered. "Let's get him to the maester's chambers." With the help of 2 Tyrell guards, Kevan was lifted to his feet and half-dragged toward the corridor. The reality of the moment crashed down on him. The coup had partly succeeded in that Cersei's secret was now revealed to enough witnesses that it couldn't be contained. Pycelle, Mace Tyrell, and the guards had all heard the accusations, seen the letter. Word would spread like wildfire, but Cersei and Jaime had escaped, and they still had loyal men in the Red Keep. The potential for a drawn-out conflict was enormous. King's Landing would soon be a battlefield of warring Lannister and Tyrell factions, with the gold cloaks caught in the middle, and the faith militant prowling the streets. Kevan clung to the hope that if the truth was out, at least Cersei could not so easily claim power. But in his weakened state, he wondered if it would be enough to stem the tide of violence. Hours blurred together as Kevan was carried through the halls, amid the sounds of swords clashing and men shouting. Once in the maester's chamber, Pycelle and an assistant bound Kevan's wound, pressing foul-smelling poultices against it. Kevan drifted in and out of awareness, catching snatches of conversation from Mace Tyrell and others who came to check on him. "The letter is real," he heard someone say. "The incest is undeniable now. The faith will have to denounce Tommen. The throne is empty." "The High Sparrow," came another voice. "He'll want them all in chains. Jaime, Cersei. The Boy King. We have no rightful heir." Kevan tried to protest, tried to argue that Tommen was still a child. But the pain overwhelmed him, and darkness swallowed his consciousness. When he woke again, It was dusk, the candlelight dancing on the stone walls. The city outside was eerily quiet, the calm after the immediate storm. Kevan tried to shift, wincing at the stab of pain in his side. Pycelle was dozing in a corner, and only one Tyrell guard stood by the door. Kevan cleared his throat, and the guard approached. "My lord, you're awake," the guard said. "We feared you might not survive the blood loss. How do you fare?" Kevan forced a whisper. "I'll live, I think." He swallowed, mouth dry. "What news?" The guard hesitated. Jaime and Cersei fled to Maegor's Holdfast. They're barricaded with a contingent of Lannister men and that huge knight, Ser Robert Strong, or so they call him. Some say he's the Mountain Reborn. The Tyrells hold the outer castle, but there's been no more fighting since midday. They're negotiating with the High Sparrow. The king, well, Tommen is said to be in the Holdfast as well. They won't let him out. Kevan closed his eyes, a wave of despair washing over him. So Cersei had retreated to a defensible position within the Red Keep, taking Tommen hostage in all but name. That meant a siege within the walls, or some sort of standoff that could only end in heartbreak. "The Faith," Kevan croaked. "What are they doing?" The guard shrugged. "The High Sparrow's men are demanding that Tommen be presented for a holy inquest to determine if he truly is a bastard. Many of the Gold Cloaks are uncertain who to obey, so they mostly stand aside. The Tyrell forces hold the gates and the courtyard, preventing any loyalists from entering or leaving. It's an uneasy stalemate. The city is in uproar, with people clamoring about the rumors of incest. Some want the boy dethroned, some cry for blood, some are simply terrified. Kevan felt a surge of regret and weariness. He had known that exposing the truth would come at a high cost, but perhaps it was necessary for the realm to face it no matter the cost. And what of the small council? Lord Tyrell? Pycelle? Who leads? The guard shook his head. Lord Tyrell and Grand Maester Pycelle have tried to restore order, but it's difficult without the king's presence. The High Sparrow demands an audience with Tommen, but the Queen Mother refuses, threatening to kill anyone who tries to breach the Holdfast. It's madness. They're allowing supplies to pass for now so we don't starve Tommen. But how long that holds, well, the Seven know. Kevan nodded weakly, mind spinning. He realized, with no small hint of irony, that in trying to prevent a greater war, he may have begun one right here in King's Landing. It might be smaller in scope, but T could still ravage the city and cause untold suffering. He drew a ragged breath, then grimaced at the pain. "Help me stand," he said to the guard. "My lord," the maester said. "I know what he said. Help me up." Kevan's tone, though weak, was resolute. The guard relented, offering an arm. Kevan rose gingerly, wincing as his bandaged side throbbed. Slowly, leaning on the guard, he made his way to the chamber door. Pycelle stirred but didn't wake fully, only muttering something incoherent. Kevan emerged into the corridor, where torches cast long shadows. 2 more Tyrell men were posted there, exchanging uneasy glances as Kevan approached. "My lord," one greeted with a nod. "We stand ready if you wish to speak with Lord Tyrell or attempt to parley." Kevan nodded. "Where is Lord Tyrell now?" "He's in the main hall, conferring with the High Sparrow. Many of the Faith militant are about, armed." Kevan felt a flicker of apprehension. The Faith militant would doubtless see him as an accomplice in the incest scandal, even if he had exposed it. They might hold him accountable for letting it fester so long. He swallowed his fears. "Very well. Take me to him." The journey through the Red Keep was jarring. Bodies lay in corridors where skirmishes had broken out, mostly black-armored knights loyal to Jaime or green and gold Tyrell guards. The injuries had not been widespread, but the sight of blood on the polished floors of the keep made Kevan's stomach churn. Servants darted about in frantic attempts to clean up or simply hide. The sense of tension in the air was palpable. Reaching the main hall, Kevan saw a scene he never thought possible. The High Sparrow, in his tattered robes, standing in front of the Iron Throne, with a cadre of armed sparrows behind him. Mace Tyrell stood at the base of the throne's dais, arms folded, his face drawn with worry. Between them, on the floor, was an array of scrolls and papers. Kevan realized they were sorting through documents that might concern Tommen's legitimacy, or maybe Cersei's trial. The High Sparrow turned as Kevan entered, a hint of pity crossing his austere features. "Lord Kevan," he said softly, "you are wounded." Kevan inclined his head. "I'll recover. The question is, can the city recover from what has transpired?" Mace Tyrell stepped forward. "You're alive, thank the Seven. You were the one who exposed the incest, yes?" Kevan braced himself against a column, ignoring the stabbing ache. It was necessary. The lie had gone on too long. A faint smile touched the High Sparrow's lips, though no warmth reached his eyes. "The truth can be painful, but it is the path to redemption. We must free the king from his mother's evil influence, and we must hold her to account for her sins. The same, of course, for Ser Jaime, who fathered these children. And we must see if the boy is truly beyond redemption." Mace Tyrell gestured to the men around him. "Our forces hold the keep except for Maegor's Holdfast, which Jaime and his men have fortified. We've sent word that they must surrender the king to us for a proper inquest. Thus far, they refuse." Kevan pictured Jaime, standing guard with a sword in one hand and a golden hand clenched. "He'll never relinquish Tommen voluntarily. He'll fight to the death. You know that." The High Sparrow's expression did not change. "Then we shall have to root out the wickedness wherever it may hide. It is the will of the Seven that such corruption be cleansed." Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "We're trying to avoid bloodshed, but the Queen Mother threatened to do harm to Tommen if we approach too closely." Kevan's heart lurched. The thought that Cersei might harm her own child was almost unthinkable. Yet he knew how desperate she was. "She would never," he began, then paused, recalling the wildfire caches under the city during the reign of the Mad King. "She might not burn Tommen, but she might threaten to blow them all to hell." The fear was real. "We must find a way to talk them down," he finished more softly. A hush fell in the hall. The High Sparrow spoke again, voice echoing. "We shall give them one more day to surrender the king. After that, we will bring the might of the faith to bear. We cannot allow an unholy Queen Mother and her blasphemous brother to hold the realm's throne hostage." Kevan looked at Mace Tyrell, who nodded reluctantly. "I can't say I disagree," Mace said, "but we also have to be mindful. Tommen is an innocent, or as innocent as can be. We don't want to harm him." Kevan shut his eyes for a moment, then forced them open. "Let me speak to Jaime," he said at last. "I'm the only one who might reason with him. He may hate me for what I've done, but if there's any chance of him yielding Tommen peacefully, I must try." The High Sparrow inclined his head. "Do so, Lord Kevan. The hour is late, but if you succeed, the boy may be spared a violent confrontation." Mace Tyrell gestured to a pair of guards. "Go with him. Make sure he doesn't come to harm. But do not provoke Jaime's men unless they attack first." Kevan nodded, though he could feel the weakness in his body. He needed rest, but time was critical. If they waited too long, the Faith might storm the Holdfast, or Cersei might attempt a desperate gambit. He leaned on the guards for support as they navigated the winding corridors toward Maegor's Holdfast. Everywhere they went, the hush of fear prevailed. The only ones who seemed calm were the Faith militant, patrolling in small groups and glaring at any sign of Lannister finery. Kevan realized he, too, might face their harsh judgment if they deemed him complicit in the incest or the subsequent deception. But he pushed that concern aside. When they reached the bridge that led to Maegor's Holdfast, a cluster of black-armored knights waited on the far side. They raised crossbows at the approach. One called out, "Come any closer and we'll shoot." Kevan raised an arm weakly, wincing at the movement. "I am Lord Kevan Lannister. I demand to speak to Ser Jaime." A tense silence followed. Then, from behind the knights, Jaime's voice rang out, "Let him through." The crossbows lowered, and the men parted. The Tyrell guards exchanged uncertain looks, then continued to escort Kevan across the narrow bridge. Kevan felt dread coil in his stomach. This could easily be a trap. But if Jaime wanted him dead, he could have shot him already. The holdfast gates opened into a courtyard where more black-armored men stood watch. Tents were hastily erected, likely for the wounded among Jaime's forces. Kevan's gaze darted around for any sign of Cersei or Tommen, but he saw only grim-faced knights and the battered hush of a desperate garrison. At last, Jaime emerged from behind a cluster of men, helmet under one arm, sword sheathed. He looked exhausted, hair disheveled, jaw set. He gave a tight nod to the Tyrell guards. "Wait here. Let me speak to my uncle alone." The guards bristled, but Kevan waved them off. "I'll be fine. Stay in sight, though, if you please." Jaime led Kevan to a secluded corner of the courtyard, behind a stone pillar that once might have held a statue. Kevan limped, leaning against the pillar for support once they stopped. He let out a shaky breath, looking at his nephew's face in the dim torchlight. Jaime regarded him with an expression of mingled anger and sorrow. "You should have known I wouldn't let you dethrone her so easily." Kevan frowned. "She's brought this upon herself. You both have. You fathered her children, Jaime. This is the consequence of that." Jaime's lips tightened. "Maybe so, but you think exposing it helps anything? You've doomed Tommen. The faith won't let him remain king. And if they have him, they might kill him as an abomination." Kevan's stomach twisted. "That's why I'm here. We want you to release Tommen to us, to the Tyrells and me, so we can place him under the faith's custody peacefully. We can argue for his life. He's just a boy. He had no part in your sins." Jaime's eyes flickered with fear and fury. "And if I give him up, you think the faith will just let him live? He's not the rightful king, they'll say. They might do anything they like. Tommen is safer with me. Safe in a besieged holdfast, with fewer men and no chance of support?" Kevan countered, exasperation edging his tone. "You cannot win a siege here, Jaime. The Tyrells outnumber you significantly, and the faith has half the city at its beck and call. If you fight, they'll break in eventually. Do you think they'll spare Tommen if you kill half their men first? They'll slaughter you all." Jaime raked his hand through his hair, golden hand glinting. "If I give him up, Cersei will never forgive me." "Cersei is beyond forgiveness," Kevan said bitterly, regretting his harshness but seeing no other way. "She's threatened the entire realm with her lies and arrogance. I was loyal to our family, but not at the cost of the realm. Please, Jaime, surrender. Spare Tommen from the horrors of a final assault." Jaime clenched his jaw, pain evident in his eyes. "She's my sister. I love her. I know that's monstrous to you, but it's the truth. He paused, searching for words. "I cannot betray her." Kevan forced himself to stay calm. "If you stand by her, you will likely die. And Tommen with you. Is that truly what you want? Even if the faith is harsh, perhaps Margaery can intervene on Tommen's behalf. The Tyrells have a stake in his well-being. They don't want him dead." Jaime scoffed. "The Tyrells want the throne. They'll cast Tommen aside if they can benefit, or hold him hostage, or marry him off again to Margaery if it suits them. Though now that the truth is out, who'd want to keep that arrangement?" "There are ways," Kevan said, his mind racing. "Maybe he remains as a figurehead, or maybe he's stripped of the crown but granted a safe life in the country. I don't know. But if he stays here, I see no future except blood and death. The city is on the brink, and the High Sparrow is zeal incarnate." Jaime turned away, staring at the dark sky. He looked like a man caught in a vice, pressed on all sides by impossible choices. "You gave us no chance to prepare, no chance to flee with Tommen." "I gave you no chance to perpetuate this lie," Kevan corrected. "My loyalty is to House Lannister, but also to the realm. Tywin would have known when to cut losses, Jaime. He'd never have let it come to this if he were alive." Jaime let out a hollow laugh. "Tywin built this web in part. He forced Cersei to marry Robert, turned a blind eye to the rumors, refused to entertain them publicly. This is his legacy, too. If only we'd left King's Landing when we had the chance." His voice trailed off. Kevan said nothing, letting the silence stretch. At length, Jaime turned back, his green eyes glistening with a mix of regret and anger. "I'll speak to Cersei. I don't promise anything, Uncle, but I'll try to make her see reason. If she remains in command, we'll all burn." A faint ember of hope flickered in Kevan's chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's all I ask." Jaime nodded curtly, then signaled his men. "Take him back," he commanded, voice hoarse. He turned away again, leaving Kevan to be escorted back across the bridge by the black-armored knights. The Tyrell guards hurried to rejoin him, relief evident on their faces that no harm had befallen Kevan. As Kevan returned to the main castle, he felt his wound throbbing, draining what little energy he had left. The short walk back to the maester's chambers seemed interminable, the corridors spinning around him. He collapsed onto a bench near a wall sconce, breathing heavily. One of the guards ran to find Pycelle. In the flickering light, Kevan reflected on Jaime's torment. Perhaps the love between Jaime and Cersei was twisted, but it was powerful enough that Jaime might still defy all reason. It all depended on whether either sibling valued Tommen's life over their own pride or even their own survival. That night, the Red Keep was still on edge. Tyrell soldiers guarded the gates, while the Faith militant guarded the city streets. No one slept easily. Kevan dozed fitfully, haunted by visions of green wildfire bursting beneath the keep, or of Tommen's young face contorted with terror as the Faith took him away. He woke repeatedly, drenched in sweat, only to find Pycelle or an attendant pressing him back to rest. Morning came with a pale, sickly light. The smell of fear lingered in the corridors. Word spread that Jaime had not yet emerged to parley. Kevan felt both impatience and a strange sense of dread. If Jaime could not sway Cersei, the High Sparrow's deadline would arrive, and the Faith, supported by Tyrell steel, would assault Maegor's Holdfast. Kevan doubted it would be straightforward. The Holdfast was nearly impregnable. The devastation would be immense. Perhaps wildfire caches still hid in the bowels of the keep, waiting for a Queen Mother's desperate hand. Late that morning, a cry rang out in the main courtyard. Kevan, who had managed to struggle into a cloak and walk with a cane, hurried as best he could, ignoring the protests of Pycelle. When he arrived, he saw a group of black-armored knights crossing the yard under a white flag. At their head was Jaime, unarmed, and by his side was Tommen, pale and trembling, but alive. Behind them walked Cersei, face like stone, wearing a plain black robe. Ser Robert Strong lumbered at her flank, silent and menacing. The yard filled with Tyrell soldiers, gold cloaks, and Faith militant. Overhead, the bells of the Great September tolled, a grim song of judgment. Kevan's heart hammered in his chest. This was the moment of surrender. Jaime raised his voice, trying to keep it steady. "We yield the king to the custody of Lord Kevan Lannister and the High Sparrow, on the condition that Tommen's life be spared and that the Queen Mother be granted a fair trial before the Faith." The High Sparrow stepped forward, flanked by armed devotees. He regarded Jaime with solemn composure, then turned to Tommen. "Your Grace," he said softly, "come with us, and the truth shall set you free of sin." Tommen, terrified, looked to Jaime, who placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Tommen swallowed hard and took a step toward the Faith. At once, two sparrows gently but firmly took him by the arms. Kevan saw tears shimmering in Tommen's eyes as he was led away. A pang of guilt tore through Kevan's heart. The boy was innocent, undone by the sins of his parents. Cersei stood rigid, her eyes filled with loathing as she glared at Kevan. "You vile traitor," she hissed under her breath, though Kevan could hear her clearly. "You destroyed our family for this?" Kevan forced himself to meet her gaze. "You destroyed our family, Cersei, the moment you chose lies and cruelty over sense." "I did what had to be done." Her lips twisted in fury, but she held her tongue as the High Sparrow approached. Jaime clenched his teeth, stepping protectively closer to Cersei. Ser Robert Strong loomed behind them, his massive frame dwarfing the Faith militant who edged warily around him. The High Sparrow nodded to Jaime. "You, too, must face judgment for your part in these sins. But today we accept your surrender." You may accompany the Queen Mother to the Great September for the hearing. Jaime's stare was flat, anger smoldering beneath. If she's harmed, you'll regret it. The High Sparrow's calm facade never wavered. We serve the will of the Seven. If she is found guilty, she will be punished. If not, she shall go free. That is the way of truth. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the courtyard. The High Sparrow looked to Kevan. Lord Kevan, your testimony shall be required as well. Kevan swallowed. I will do as my conscience demands, he said quietly, though he wondered if he would be blamed for enabling the secret all these years. He might not walk free himself. Still, it was done now. The truth was out, and the realm would have to grapple with what came next. And so, under the unblinking gaze of a city hungry for answers, the Queen Mother and the King were taken into custody. Jaime followed as a captive escort, and Kevan watched them go with a heavy heart. There was no joy in victory, only the grim resolution that they had prevented something worse. Yet the storm had only begun. The Tyrells might prop up a new ruler or try to retain Tommen in some capacity, while the Faith would undoubtedly push for a cleansing of the royal line. Across the narrow sea, rumors of Daenerys Targaryen might grow more appealing to those who yearned for a stable monarchy. The seeds of conflict had been sown. In the days that followed, the Great September prepared for a trial unlike any other, with the entire realm's attention fixed on King's Landing. Cersei and Jaime were kept in separate cells, while Tommen was housed in a small tower under guard. Kevan, still nursing his wound, spent much of his time in forced convalescence, though he was summoned repeatedly to the High Sparrow to confirm details about the letter and the rumors of incest. Mace Tyrell called on Kevan more than once, anxious about the ramifications for the alliance between their houses. Kevan had no easy answers, only the faint reassurance that House Tyrell would emerge better off than House Lannister, whose name was now synonymous with scandal. Outside the city, small folk and lords alike began to arrive, either hoping to witness the trial or to press advantage in the power vacuum. Kevan dreaded the possibility that the trial could end in a spectacle of violence if Cersei demanded a trial by combat again, especially with Ser Robert Strong at her command. But the Faith militants seemed prepared for that scenario, with the Tyrell forces backing them. Everything was poised on a knife's edge. And so it was that Kevan Lannister found himself in the Sept on the appointed day, the Seven towering above in their majestic windows. The halls were filled with hushed tension, benches crowded with nobles, sparrows, and curious onlookers. The High Sparrow presided, flanked by septas and septons who chanted prayers. Jaime was there, wearing simple clothes, a single manacle on his golden hand. Cersei stood in plain robes, hair shorn close to her head, face like cold marble. Tommen, trembling in a seat of honor, was forced to watch. Kevan's heart ached for the boy. He had believed himself king, only to discover he was no true Baratheon, no rightful heir. It was a cruel fate for a child. The trial proceeded with formalities, the High Sparrow enumerating the charges of incest and adultery, as well as the forging of lineage. Kevan was called to testify. He rose, leaning on a cane, and recounted what he had discovered, Jaime's letter, the confessions it contained. He also spoke of rumors that had circulated for years, how King Robert had been too drunk to notice, how Tywin had denied everything, how it all came to a head in the Red Keep. With each word, Kevan felt the guilt of betrayal, but also a sense of grim necessity. The realm deserved the truth, no matter how sordid. Cersei's eyes bored into him like daggers. Jaime stared at the floor. When Kevan finished, the High Sparrow's voice rose, echoing in the vaulted chamber. You have heard the testimony. You have seen the letter. Now, Ser Jaime, Queen Mother Cersei, what have you to say? Jaime's fists clenched, and he stepped forward. I do not deny my love for my sister, he began, to a gasp from the crowd. But I cannot watch Tommen suffer for our sins. He is innocent. His voice trembled. If you must punish someone, punish me. Cersei's voice cut through the tension, sharp and unyielding. We are the blood of House Lannister. Our children are lions of the rock, our